Well, good morning, Doc here. I'm getting ready to do a tune-up on this 2008 Focus. Wanted to give you an idea how that goes. Quick background on me: I've been a lifetime technician, ASE certified as a master automobile technician and a heavy-duty medium truck technician. Spent over 40 years working in the automotive service field, and I want to give you some tips on how to save money. Let's go ahead and get into this. I've laid out some tools. Got my ratchet, of course, an extension, an 8mm socket, two different size spark plugs sockets. Of course, I got the spark plugs, and I've got the coil wires that go with it. I'll explain what that's all about here in just a moment. So let's get to it. Here's the place where I buy my parts from now. These are pretty good discount off the parts that you go get at the dealership. Of course, you have to have them mailed to you, so you need to do this in advance. So here are the spark plugs that I picked up. You've got a choice of various spark plugs that you can get when you get onto that Rock Auto site. I went to pick the Bosch spark plugs. They're platinum. Got a very small platinum tip on them. Isn't that cute? And when you stop to think about how fast these things are sparking, typically an engine's going to run at an idle when you're sitting at a stop sign around 800 RPM. That means the engine is rotating 800 times a minute. Every second revolution the spark plug has to fire. So that means even at idle, each one of these spark plugs is sparking about 400 times a minute. That's pretty dang fast. It's faster than I can drum. Imagine what it's like when you get to 3,000, 4,000 RPM when you're traveling down the highway. These suckers are lasting 100,000 miles plus. I got about 110,000 miles in the spark plugs I'm about to pull out. You'll get to see how they look, and you're going to find out they look like, wow, they look like they could keep on going. The other thing I'm going to replace is the coil on plug that I got. These are NGKs. I also got these from Rock Auto. There's the boot, and there's a resistor coil spring. The reason it's a resistor is to help avoid noise and static in your radio, two-way radios, ham radios, TVs, things like that. So obviously this is something that should be replaced as well, because every time this spark plug fires, that means this little goodie right there is traveling the electricity through to make that spark happen up on the tip. So this is taking a beating as well. Now, they'll try to recommend to you every 100,000 miles to replace this in the boot as well. Mine are original, 212,000 miles. They're still going strong, but I figured now's a good time since I'm in there to go ahead and replace these. So let's go ahead and get on into this. I got the tools that I believe I'm going to need. Let's get started. Let's get your hands dirty. This is pretty typical of a four-cylinder engine of its era. It's computer controlled, fuel injected, and each spark plug has its own coil on it. Now, back in the day when they had 12,000 mile intervals, they would have one coil that would feed all the cylinders, 4, 6, or 8, depending on how many it had. In this case, we got 4 cylinders, but instead of having a single coil going through a distributor cap and rotor and then going out to feed the various cylinders, now they have a coil on each cylinder. These are the coils. Nice thing about this is if one of the coils fails, you'll end up having a misfire, but not a complete engine failure. Engine will chug and snort and cough and sputter, but it'll run, it'll get you someplace. In the old days, if you had just one single coil and it went bad, all bets are off. So these are the little wires coming from the computer to tell each coil when to spark. Back in my day, I hate saying that because it makes me sound old. Back in my day, they had a carburetor up on the top of the manifold, and it was not very fuel economical. So back in the day of the carburetor, we didn't have fuel injection system. We didn't have the advent of the computer yet to control all of these functions. But once they came up with the computer controls, then they could precisely fire the injectors and the sparks and the timing, the air-fuel ratio. It's all done by the computer now, so they're much more economical than they used to be. And because of new materials, they're lasting a lot longer than they used to. So let's get into it. We've got an 8mm head on these sockets down here, on these bolts. We're going to pull those off and then pull these coils up out of the way. I'd like to mention now, when you go to put these back together later on, you don't want to tighten these down too tight. We'll cover that towards the end of the video as well. I'll be very gentle with these. I like to go through and break the tension on each one. You can hear that little click. Now these probably don't need the ratchet so much anymore to loosen them. They call finger tight, wrench loose. So far not so bad, right? Now some cars are going to have plastic trim covers over the whole thing, and you look at it and go, where's the engine? And those are a little bit trickier to figure out how to get them. Most of them just pop up, but you're afraid to do that because you're afraid you're going to break something because they're plastic. Down at each cylinder, and I can look at the spark plug itself, and I'm looking to see if there's any oil or moisture down in there, and I don't see any, so we're all good there. Next thing to do now is to take these boots off, replace them with that coil spring I was telling you about. So there, I've got the coils, spring, and boots replaced on all of these. So my next step now is I'm going to get down into these holes, get those spark plugs out. You can see what I have to put together here, because it's down to that hole a little bit deep. So I'm going to put it down, wiggle a little bit until I can feel it drop in, and then I know it's on the spark plug. Let's see what that puppy looks like, shall we? Now in this case, I want to slow this down a little bit. You have to be real careful pulling them out. As I mentioned before, in some cases the spark plug will grow some carbon deposits on the tips of the threads, especially if the threads go down into the cylinder. Let me show you an example if I could real quick. There's the new spark plug that I'm going to be putting in this car. Here's the spark plug that I'm going to be putting in my wife's Edge. Okay, there you go. See how long that one is compared to it? And that's where I mentioned sometimes these will actually break, right about here. These extra threads on the top go down into the combustion chamber where all the firing is going on. All the air-fuel mixture that's blowing up leaves carbon deposits, and those act like little anchors. So when you're trying to unthread this, they don't want to come through the hole, and if you fight it, it could break. So I wanted to show you the difference there. In this case, I'm not too worried about it, but you still want to make sure that it's nice and smooth coming out. Feel just a little bit of slight tension, nothing too bad. In fact, I could almost do this by hand without the ratchet. I'll speed the video up for the other ones because this is kind of boring to watch. Case where I mentioned sometimes it's nice to have magnet. I'll show you how that works. It's one of the more popular tools. There we go. How's that look to you? Looks to me like it might be used, but see that tiny little wire in the middle? It almost looks like it's got a ways to go before it goes bad. It's just really, really impressive to me, especially from being the old technician that had to replace them at 12,000 miles and they were wiped out. Now I'm doing this one at 112,000 miles, and it looks pretty fresh. Okay, so there's the 4 spark plugs I just took out, along with a new one I'm about to put in. And you can see, as far as the worn part of the tip, they don't look all that bad. So what you want to do is you just want to put it on in until you feel it stop, and then just give it a little oomph. Not much. They have an actual torque setting for it. I think it's 12 to 15 inch-pounds. But basically just put it in until you feel it stop, and then just a little oomph just to tighten it up, because that will hold in place. They're designed to be able to fit into that bevel, and that helps to lock it into place for you. So now I can take a quick look to make sure they all look good. As I mentioned before, they're all gapped from the factory. No need to mess with them unless you happen to drop one on something. So we're all good. Let's put them in. Okay, so we've got them all in there now. That should all take care of what we've got going on here. You don't want to tighten these up too tight. Just give them a good snug, because sometimes this plastic down in here can crack. You don't want to do that. Okay, so we've got the spark plugs replaced. Now the rest of the tune-up, of course, I'll be checking the filters, doing a few other checkovers. One thing I'd like to point out is today's tune-up is a whole lot different than the tune-ups of 40 years ago, 50 years ago, when I was first getting started doing these kind of things. Wow, 50 years ago I started working on cars. Anyway, used to be a tune-up was replacing all the spark plugs, point, condenser, cap and rotor, checking the coil, replacing the fuel filter, which was in the carburetor. What's a carburetor, you might ask? Thought some of you younger folks might have wondered about that. It was a precursor to the modern day fuel injectors. Nowadays a tune-up is simply replacing the spark plugs, and every once in a while, every other tune-up may be replacing the boot and the little spring, because they also can wear out and cause problems, which can cause fuel efficiency problems that you don't want these days. And then check the air filter. The air going into the engine needs to be cleaned, so the air filter needs to be cleaned, and it needs to be secured, and then the spark plugs to be replaced. That's really about it. One of the things I wanted to point out is the mass airflow sensor. Now, don't want to get too technical on this video. I'll explain it better in another video if you'd like. Look for mass airflow sensor. But basically what that does is it takes the filtered air that's coming through the air filter. After it's been filtered, it measures how much quantity of air is going to go into the engine. And it depends on the density of the air, whether you're high altitude or low altitude. The density of the air also could be thicker if it's moist. If there's a lot of humidity in the air, that makes it a little bit denser. And these all have to do with the combustion, how strong as the explosion you're going to get that makes your engine run. Put in simple terms. Now, that mass airflow sensor sends a signal to the computer. Here's exactly how much air is going in every second, even faster. And the computer decides how much fuel to put in for each one and then when to spark it. That's all got to work out very well. We have seen sometimes for the mass airflow sensor, and I'll show you a picture of one that's got a bug in it. Sometimes the bug will get in there because the air cleaner wasn't secured. Or when somebody was pulling the lid off to change the air filter, they might have shook the air filter, which some of it drops down into the box. If they don't clean that out first before they put it back together, it can get sucked up. So they got to be careful and clean this. If the bug was to get in there, or a leaf or something like that, get stuck between those two wires I talked about in the mass airflow sensor, it's going to send a faulty signal to the computer, and the computer's going to send a faulty exercise out to the fuel injectors. If that happens, it can cause it to run too rich or too lean, or sometimes not even to start. It can chug and search, and you're not sure what's going on. So you take it in, have somebody hook up a computer, talk to it. The code comes through, says the mass airflow sensor is way out of whack. So that has to be replaced. About 150, 200 bucks for the part, depending on the labor they charge to put it in. Sometimes you can find out for yourself if that's what's going on. It doesn't cost anything really to pull the snorkel off, look inside and see if there's a bug. If there is, blow it out, clean it out. They have some cleaners that you can use specifically for the mass airflow sensor. Best step I can give you is to find a technician or a mechanic that you could trust, that somebody else has referred to, and repeatedly go back and forth with them. Let them get familiar with you and with your car. They'll be more apt to give you an honest assessment. I hope you like it. Doc's fun projects. I do woodworking. I play with epoxies. I do a lot of automotive type stuff. So if you're interested in it, please like and subscribe and let me know. And if you have any questions about anything in particular, shoot them my way, and I will look for those questions, and that might prompt me to put together a video to help you specifically with your question. Hope you have a great day. Doc out.